The night smelled of expensive wine and polished floors, the kind of atmosphere designed to impress rather than comfort. I had been here before, same venue, similar company dinners, standing beside my wife as she navigated conversations with effortless charm. But something was different this time. Not in the setting, not in the guests. In her. Leona had always been the kind of woman who thrived in social settings, but tonight, she felt distant even when standing right beside me. She laughed too brightly, spoke too quickly, and when she thought I wasn't looking, she checked her phone with an expression I couldn't place. Excitement? Nervousness? Guilt? I kept my hands in my pockets, trying not to overthink. Maybe it was just another long work week weighing on her. Maybe I was imagining things. Then, she excused herself. It was casual, effortless. "I'll be right back," she said, placing a light hand on my arm before walking away. I watched her slip through the crowd, her red dress moving like a flicker of flame between the clusters of mingling executives. I told myself to let it go, to enjoy the evening like a normal husband. But the gnawing in my chest told me otherwise. So I followed. Not because I didn't trust her. Because something inside me whispered that I was about to witness something I wasn't supposed to see. And I was right. I turned a corner near the bar, scanning the room. At first, I didn't spot her. Then my gaze landed on her, standing close, too close, with a man I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened. His hand rested at the small of her back, fingers splayed possessively against the fabric of her dress. And then, in a movement that felt both slow and instant, he leaned in and kissed her. Not a hesitant peck. Not an accidental brush of lips. A kiss that spoke of familiarity, of intimacy, of something that had been happening long before tonight. The breath left my lungs in a silent exhale. I had imagined heartbreak before, but never like this. My body moved before my mind could catch up, stepping toward them with a steadiness that didn't match the chaos in my chest. The moment her eyes lifted and met mine, time seemed to slow. The color drained from her face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just looked at her, then at him, before speaking the words that felt like a sentence being handed down in a courtroom. "You just destroyed our marriage." Her lips parted, but not in apology, not in shock. Instead, she simply said, with an almost eerie calmness, "You're mistaken." And in that moment, I realized, this wasn't just betrayal. This was something much worse. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The noise of the party, the distant clinking of glasses, the muffled hum of laughter, became nothing more than static in the background. It was just the three of us now. Leona, the stranger, and me. She didn't rush to explain. She didn't recoil in guilt or stammer out a defense. Instead, she stood there, her face carefully blank, her eyes locked onto mine as though she were waiting for my next move. I searched for something, anything in her expression. Regret, panic, shame. But all I saw was exhaustion. As if I were the one being unreasonable. I let out a slow, measured breath, forcing down the burning lump in my throat. "I'm mistaken?" I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "You expect me to believe that?" The man beside her finally spoke, his tone smooth, practiced. "Maybe we should." I cut him off with a look. A long, deliberate stare that made his words die in his throat. He wasn't used to being ignored. I could tell. Men like him thrived on control, on confidence, on the knowledge that they were untouchable. I turned back to my wife. My wife. She had been mine for 7 years. I had built my life around her, woken up beside her, shared every secret, every dream, every insecurity. And now, she stood before me like a stranger. She sighed, rubbing her temple like this was some minor inconvenience, like I had caught her sneaking a cigarette rather than another man's lips on hers. "I don't want to do this here," she murmured. I almost laughed. Here? As if the setting mattered. As if what she had done would somehow be less of a betrayal in a different location. "You don't want to do this here?" I repeated. "Then where? At home? In bed? Maybe in the morning over coffee?" Her jaw tightened. "Please, keep your voice down." My voice. My voice. Like I was the problem. I ran a hand through my hair, suddenly hyper-aware of the room around us. People were watching. Not everyone, not yet, but enough. Some stole glances, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Others turned away quickly, pretending not to notice. This wasn't just a scene. It was the beginning of something unraveling. I felt my stomach twist. I didn't want to be here anymore. Not in this room, not in this moment. So I did the only thing I could. I walked away. Not because I was weak. Not because I was surrendering. But because I needed air before the weight of everything crushed me. I pushed through the grand doors of the banquet hall, stepping into the cool night air. The city hummed around me, cars speeding past, neon signs flickering in the distance. The breeze hit my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was a storm, chaotic, relentless, pounding against the walls of my sanity. She kissed him. She let him touch her. She chose to do this. And then she looked me in the eye and told me I was mistaken. I pressed my hands against my face, exhaling shakily. What the hell just happened? I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something, to break something, to do anything to dull the ache in my chest. But instead, I stood there, hands on my knees, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the weight of reality settled in. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something we could talk through, fix with a few apologies and promises. This was betrayal. Real betrayal. And the worst part? She wasn't even sorry. I don't know how long I stood outside, letting the city breathe around me while my world collapsed. But eventually, I heard the sound of heels clicking against pavement. I didn't have to turn around to know it was her. Can we talk? Leona's voice was soft now, almost hesitant. I clenched my jaw. Now you want to talk? She sighed, stepping closer. I didn't want to do this here, but you. I spun to face her. I what? I caught you. That's what happened. There's no right place for that. She wrapped her arms around herself, her confident mask cracking just slightly. You don't understand. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, I understand perfectly. She hesitated. And in that moment, I knew. There was more. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This wasn't some drunken lapse in judgment. This was something bigger. Something worse. Say it, I whispered. Leona swallowed hard, her gaze flickering to the pavement, then back to me. I didn't think you'd come tonight. The words hit me like a freight train. Because beneath them, buried in the layers of unspoken meaning, was the truth she wasn't saying. This was planned. This wasn't a random kiss. She thought she could do this right under my nose and get away with it. And that realization hurt more than anything else. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't think you'd come tonight. Leona's words played over and over in my head like a broken record, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some lapse in judgment or heat of the moment stupidity. She planned this. She walked into this event, knowing I might see, knowing what it would do to me, and she did it anyway. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay still, to keep my voice even when all I wanted to do was demand answers. So, what? I said finally. If I hadn't come, would you have just gone home and pretended everything was fine? Leona exhaled, her arms tightening around herself. I don't know. A pathetic answer. A useless, empty answer that told me everything I needed to know. I shook my head, running a hand down my face, trying to grasp onto the last remnants of my composure. Who is he? She hesitated. Who is he? I repeated, my voice sharper now. A pause. Then, finally, his name is Marcus. Marcus. I didn't recognize the name, but that didn't mean anything. I hadn't paid much attention to her coworkers, to the people in her office, because I had trusted her. I had trusted her. And how long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Leona winced. She didn't want to say it. But at this point, she owed me the truth. 6 months, she murmured. 6 months. Half a year. While I had been waking up next to her, making her coffee, planning weekend getaways, thinking we were just going through a rough patch, she had been sneaking off with him. A bitter laugh bubbled in my chest. 6 months, I repeated, shaking my head. And what? You were just waiting for the right time to tell me? Or were you never planning to? Leona looked down at the pavement. I took a slow step forward. Tell me the truth, Leona. If I hadn't walked in tonight, would you have ever told me? Silence. And that was my answer. She never planned on telling me. I let out a slow, shuddering breath, nodding to myself. Okay, I said, my voice distant, foreign to my own ears. Okay. Okay, she echoed uncertainly. I met her eyes. Yeah. Okay. I get it now. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to salvage. She had made her choice. I turned on my heel and started walking toward the parking lot. Wait, Leona called after me, her voice suddenly desperate. We need to talk about this. I kept walking. Please, she said, and now she was hurrying to catch up, her heels clicking against the pavement. Don't just walk away. We need to talk. I whirled around, and she almost ran into me. Talk? I said, my voice dangerously calm. Now you want to talk? After 6 months of lying to my face, now it's important. Her eyes glistened under the streetlights, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt or just frustration that things weren't going the way she planned. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. My jaw tightened. "You don't get to say that." She flinched, and for a brief second, I saw it, the tiniest crack in her composure. Maybe she really had convinced herself that this wasn't that bad, that she had some grand justification for what she did. But the truth was, she had killed our marriage the moment she made that choice. I just didn't know how to end things," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. I let out a hollow laugh. "So, what? Instead of ending things, you just decided to string me along while sleeping with someone else." "I didn't want to hurt you," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I clenched my fists. "You didn't want to hurt me? Leona, you didn't just hurt me. You took everything I thought I knew about my life and set it on fire." She wiped at her eyes, her breathing uneven. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Too bad," I said coldly. "Because it did." She reached for my arm, but I pulled away before she could touch me. I couldn't stand the thought of her hands on me now, not after his had been there too. I took another step back, my mind racing. My life, my future, everything I had built with this woman, it was all gone. And yet, in the middle of the devastation, something shifted inside me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could see clearly. She didn't love me. Maybe she once did. Maybe she even meant her wedding vows at the time. But somewhere along the way, she had chosen to betray me. And I wasn't going to let her keep me trapped in this nightmare any longer. "You don't have to explain anything," I said, my voice steady now. "Not anymore." Leona's lips parted, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I turned, got in my car, and drove away, leaving her and everything we had behind. For the first time that night, I felt something close to peace. Because I knew one thing for certain. This was the last time Leona would ever get to lie to me again. I don't remember much of the drive home. The city lights blurred together, and the radio played something soft, but I wasn't really listening. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my breathing shallow as I fought to process what had just happened. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of deception, of pretending everything was fine while she was with another man. I had been living in a reality that wasn't even real. I pulled into the driveway, shutting off the engine but not moving. The house stood before me, dark and silent, a shell of everything I had believed it to be. I used to look at this place and see home. Now, all I saw was a monument to my own ignorance. I finally forced myself out of the car, my legs feeling heavier than they should. The second I stepped inside, I was hit with the scent of her perfume, still lingering in the air, still wrapped around me like a cruel joke. I nearly gagged. I didn't know what to do with myself. My thoughts were running so fast I couldn't catch a single one long enough to make sense of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing there with him, her lips on his, her body leaning into his touch. I walked to the kitchen, opening a cabinet and grabbing a glass. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. I wasn't sure if I was angry, heartbroken, or just completely numb. I needed answers. No, I deserved answers. And I wasn't going to just sit here and wait for her to come home and spin whatever version of events made her feel better. I grabbed my phone, my thumb hovering over her contact. But then I hesitated. What was I going to say? Was I really ready to hear her try to justify what she did? Was I prepared to listen to her blame the marriage, or say it just happened, or that she'd never meant for it to go this far? I already knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. I shut my phone off and set it on the counter. No calls. No texts. I wouldn't be the one chasing answers tonight. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to be the one to do it. And if she didn't? Then that told me everything I needed to know. The door that no longer felt like mine. I don't know how much time passed before I heard the front door open. For a second, my entire body tensed, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then, her voice. "Brent?" She said my name softly, like she was testing the waters, like she wasn't sure what version of me she'd find on the other side of this conversation. I stayed where I was, my back to her, staring at the glass on the counter like it had answers I couldn't find anywhere else. Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped closer. "Can we talk?" I let out a slow breath. "Here we go?" I turned around, finally meeting her eyes. She looked tired. Not broken, not guilty. Just tired. I waited for her to speak, but she just stood there, biting her lip, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't planned for this moment. She had planned for me to never know. I crossed my arms. "Go ahead. Talk." Leona swallowed hard, her fingers curling at her sides. I don't know where to start. I almost laughed. Of course, she didn't. Try the part where you spent 6 months lying to my face, I said. That seems like a good place to begin. She flinched. It wasn't like that. I narrowed my eyes. Then tell me what it was like. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. It was like she was sorting through excuses in her mind, trying to pick the one that would hurt me the least. I wasn't interested in hearing excuses. Finally, she spoke. I didn't plan for this to happen. I let out a breath, shaking my head. And yet it did. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Brent, things have been different between us for a while. I tilted my head. And that means what? That you get a free pass to cheat on me? You don't like how things are going. So instead of talking to me, you run to someone else. Her jaw clenched. I don't expect you to understand. That caught me off guard. I blinked. You don't expect me to. My voice broke off, and suddenly I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. Wow, I muttered. Wow. She sighed. Brent, please, let's not. No, I cut in. Let's do this. Since we're talking, let's really talk. Leona shifted on her feet. You say things have been different. Fine. Maybe they have. But do you know what people who actually love each other do when things feel different? I leaned forward slightly. They talk. They work through it. They don't sneak around behind their spouse's back for 6 months. She let out a frustrated breath. It wasn't just about sneaking around. I scoffed. Oh, I'm sorry. Does that part bother you? That's what it was, Leona. You snuck around. You hid it. You made sure I never found out. That's sneaking. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She had nothing to say because she knew I was right. I shook my head. Tell me something. If I hadn't seen you tonight, if I never caught you, how much longer would this have gone on? Her gaze dropped to the floor. I waited. And then, she whispered, I don't know. And there it was. The answer that told me everything. She wasn't going to stop. Not until she got caught. Not until I made the decision for her. A heavy silence filled the room, stretching between us like an uncrossable distance. I swallowed, my throat raw. You killed us, Leona. She looked up, her expression twisted in pain. I didn't want to. I nodded. But you did. And with that, something inside me finally settled. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. And I think she finally saw it too. She opened her mouth, maybe to say something, maybe to fight for something she had already destroyed. But I didn't give her the chance. I stepped past her, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. Because the truth was, I didn't need to hear anything else. I already knew how this ended. And for the first time in months, I had no intention of waiting around to see it happen. I drove without thinking, without knowing where I was going, without a destination in mind. The city stretched out before me, a maze of blurred lights and empty streets. I needed to get away, from the house, from her, from the suffocating weight of everything I had just learned. My grip on the steering wheel was tight, my knuckles pale under the streetlights. My mind kept replaying the moment she admitted it, the way she had looked down, as if the answer would magically change if she just avoided my eyes. I don't know. She didn't know how much longer she would have kept lying to me. She didn't know when, or if, she ever would have come clean. And that was the part that burned the most. This wasn't some mistake she regretted the second it happened. This was a choice. Over and over again, she had chosen him, his touch, his company, his bed. She had come home to me every night, smiled at me over dinner, let me kiss her goodnight, all while carrying this secret like it was nothing. I pulled into an empty parking lot near a park. The clock on the dashboard read 12:43 a.m. I put the car in park, then leaned back against the seat, exhaling. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. How do you come back from this? The simple answer was, you don't. A marriage isn't just about love. It's about trust. And once that's gone, what's left? A bitter laugh escaped me as I stared up at the roof of my car. All these years, I thought we were happy. I thought we had built something real, something solid. But clearly, I had been the only one holding it up. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. I sighed and reached for it. A series of missed calls from Leona. A few texts. Please, come home. We need to talk. I don't want this to be the end. Brent, please answer. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. She wanted to talk? Now that the lies had crumbled, now that the truth was out in the open, now that I had finally walked away? For what? To tell me she was sorry? To promise she'd do better? I let out a slow breath, my fingers hovering over the screen. Then, I did the only thing that made sense. I turned my phone off. She didn't get to decide when this conversation ended. For once, I was the one in control. I didn't go home that night. I drove around aimlessly, trying to process everything. But no matter how much distance I put between myself and that house, the truth followed me like a shadow. By the time the sun started rising, I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner. The neon sign flickered, the place mostly empty except for a few tired souls nursing cups of coffee. I slid into a booth, ordering a coffee I wasn't sure I could stomach. I barely noticed the waitress as she set the cup in front of me. My thoughts were too tangled, looping back to the same questions over and over again. How long had she felt this way? Had she ever planned to tell me the truth? Did she ever really love me? Or was I just convenient? I took a sip of coffee, wincing at the bitterness. I should have added sugar. But what was one more bitter thing in a night full of them? I stared down at the dark liquid, my fingers tightening around the cup. What now? I could go home. I could let her talk, let her explain. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd beg. Maybe she'd say all the right things. But what good would it do? There was no magic sentence that could erase what I saw. No perfect apology that could fix what was broken. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear her out. I wasn't sure if I could. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about her anymore. For so long, I had been wrapped up in what she wanted, what she felt, what she needed. But she had already made her decision. Now it was my turn. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. For the first time since I had shut it off, I turned it back on. Missed calls, voicemails, a dozen unread messages. And then, one new message from an unknown number. My brow furrowed as I opened it. Brent, I don't know how to say this, but you need to know the truth. Call me. No name. No context. But attached to the message, a photo. I clicked on it, and my blood ran cold. Because staring back at me was Leona and Marcus. Not at the party. Not in some dimly lit restaurant. But in a hotel room. And the timestamp? Yesterday. I stared at the photo, my stomach twisting into a knot so tight I thought I might be sick. Leona. Marcus. Together, in a hotel room, taken just yesterday. Everything inside me went numb. The party had only been the tip of the iceberg. This wasn't just some office fling or a drunken mistake. This was deliberate. Thought out. Planned. She had spent the day in a hotel with him, then come home to me like nothing had happened. She had looked me in the eye, kissed me goodnight, and let me believe we still had something worth saving. I felt like a fool. The phone in my hand felt heavier than it should. My thumb hovered over the unknown number, my brain racing. Who sent this? And why? I hesitated for a second before tapping the call button. It rang twice before a voice answered. Low, hesitant. Brent. My grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? A pause. Then, my name is Ryan. I work with Marcus. Marcus. Just hearing his name made my jaw clench. Ryan exhaled on the other end of the line. Look, I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but after what I saw last night, he trailed off before continuing. I thought you should know the truth. I closed my eyes. Just say it. I've known about them for months, Ryan admitted, his voice heavy with something that almost sounded like guilt. Everyone at the office does. It's not a secret, Brent. Not to us, anyway. My fingers dug into the table. And no one thought to tell me. Ryan sighed. I wanted to. But Leona, she told everyone you two had an arrangement. My heart nearly stopped. An arrangement? She said you knew. That you were fine with it. I felt like the room was spinning. Leona hadn't just cheated. She had destroyed my reputation. She had made me into some pathetic man who knew his wife was sleeping around and just let it happen. I swallowed hard. How long? Ryan hesitated. I don't know exactly when it started, but at least a year. A year. 12 months. 52 weeks of lies. And all that time, she had let me believe it was just 6 months. My grip on the phone tightened. Why are you telling me this now? Ryan hesitated again, and for a second, I thought he might hang up. But then, his voice dropped to a whisper. Because Marcus doesn't care who he hurts. And I think you deserve better than this. There was something else in his tone. Something off. I frowned. What aren't you telling me? Ryan exhaled. Look, I don't know how much you want to hear, but I'll tell you this. Marcus isn't just with your wife. The words hung in the air, suffocating. He has other women. And if Leona thinks she's special, she's lying to herself just like she's been lying to you. My throat went dry. She had thrown away everything for a man who didn't even care about her. I let out a breath. Send me everything you have. Ryan hesitated for only a second before agreeing. I'll send you what I can. And then, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, waiting, and within seconds, the photos started rolling in. Picture after picture. Different days. Different places. Hotel rooms. Bars. A car. Leona. Marcus. And in some of them, other women, too. It was all there. The proof. The betrayal. The sheer depth of her lies. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about who I was going to be after it was over. I drove home slowly, my thoughts a chaotic mess. I had the proof, the truth. There was no room for doubt anymore. But now, I had to decide what came next. I wasn't the type of man to scream or break things. That wasn't me. But this wasn't just some minor betrayal. This was a calculated deception. She had thrown away our marriage for him. And worse, she had done it so publicly that I was the last to know. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car parked in its usual spot. She was inside, waiting. I stepped out of the car, walking up to the door with slow, deliberate steps. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. My hands weren't shaking. I had never felt calmer. I opened the door, stepping inside. Leona was sitting on the couch, her legs curled up beneath her, her phone in her hand. The second she saw me, she sat up straight, relief flashing in her eyes. "Brent, you're back." I nodded, shutting the door behind me. "Yeah." She let out a breath. I was worried. I cut her off. "Don't." She blinked. "What?" I walked further inside, pulling out my phone. Without a word, I tossed it onto the coffee table, the screen lighting up with the last picture Ryan had sent. Leona's face paled. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers twitched against her lap. She knew. She knew she had nothing left to say. I sat down across from her, my expression unreadable. "I know everything." Her lips parted, but no words came out. "You've been lying to me for a year. Maybe longer. You told people we had an arrangement, so no one would tell me the truth. And all this time, you were just one of many." Leona swallowed hard, her breath shaky. "Brent." "I don't need excuses," I said calmly. "I just want one thing." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What?" I met her eyes, unwavering. "The truth." She hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "I already told you." I shook my head. "No. You told me what you thought I wanted to hear. Now, I want the real truth." She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. It just happened, Brent. Things between us changed. You were always so busy, and Marcus, he made me feel wanted." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "You know what's funny? You threw everything away for him, and he doesn't even care about you." Her head snapped up. "That's not true." I leaned forward, my voice still calm. "He's cheating on you too, Leona. With multiple women." She stared at me like I had just spoken a foreign language. "No, he wouldn't." I slid my phone toward her, letting her see the proof for herself. The texts, the pictures, the timestamps. I watched as her face crumbled. Her hands trembled as she scrolled, her breathing uneven. For the first time, I saw it. Not confidence, not arrogance, fear. Because now, she wasn't just losing me. She was losing the life she had gambled everything for. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know." I leaned back, folding my arms. Neither did I. The room went silent, nothing but the sound of her shallow breathing filling the space. And in that silence, I made my decision. I stood up, grabbing my keys. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice desperate now. I didn't look back. "Somewhere you can't follow." And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving her and everything she had destroyed behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt free.